You know, as someone who spent 2 years working as a shift supervisor at Starbucks, it's really glad to hear that the taste of Starbucks coffee still hasn't changed in the apocalypse. You don't have to fake the laughter. It's a bad joke. I understand. It's the brand. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our review of the latest episode of HBO Max's The Last of Us TV show based on the video game of the same name. This one is episode 4, titled Episode 4, according to my HBO Max right now. I don't know what the name of the episode is. I'm sure you all know yourselves, but I am trying something new this week for my review, or at least semi-new if you didn't catch last week's review, because I am bringing in my friend and co-writer on my main channel, Aronok, who you probably should be over there on the screen, or maybe over there. I don't know. I don't know where you are, but in my screen you're up here. But I think where
I found the episode title. It's called "Please Hold to My Hand."
Oh, well, there we can hold it there. You can hold each other's hand. There. I don't know. I don't know where I'll put you. There we go.
I don't know why I gripped.
Yeah, it was weird. Anyway, it was a great start already, everybody. But yes,
we're very professional in this.
Very professional. But anyways, I'm going to be reviewing this episode of The Last of Us with Aronok. And just to let everybody know, since I am putting up this review on my secondary channel, Jessie Gender After Dark, where you're watching this right now, if you missed my review of last week's episode, which was absolutely amazing, one of my favorite episodes of TV ever, period, full stop. That is because I actually didn't put that review on this channel. I put it over on my main channel, Jessie Gender, which some of you may not be subscribed to. So if you want my review where Aronok and I cry our eyes out for an hour about that episode and go over some of the details and thoughts and themes of it, check it out over there. And we're going to talk about this one. But yes, you had something you wanted to say.
I swear I do things other than cry on camera for Jessie.
I just get you to cry for me every single time. That's all you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was a really good conversation, but I decided
it really was. That episode's just gorgeous.
Less to talk about with this one.
I feel bad for every other episode in the series because I don't think they're going to be able to I don't think they'll be able to reach that height. I'm sorry.
No, it happens. It happens with a bunch
really
of TV
enjoying
shows.
The series, but damn, did they really go all out on episode 3?
Yeah. I will say this is probably
going interesting.
Yeah, this episode was interesting. I think this one was probably my least favorite of the series so far, but not because it's bad, but because this one feels more like it is
it's half an episode.
Yeah, it feels like half an episode, and also especially since every episode up until this point has felt like a whole movie in and of itself, especially episode 1 and 3. But like this one also feels like a moving pieces into place episode. Like it's setting up the board for things going forward, both in terms of relationships and in terms of like story setup.
Yeah, I feel like it's the first one that's really solidly felt like, okay, we're a TV show, we're doing an ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I would say the previous 3, it's a little bit more of like, you like that film? Here's a sequel. Like
yeah. They all felt like maybe the second episode a little less so, but they all felt like self-contained stories at their time. But even that one kind of had its own thing going on. Yeah.
I think it's more just the fact that this is the first time an episode hasn't felt complete. And we were talking about this. The creators actually mushed the first 2 episodes together, which I think why the pilot feels so much like we're telling this chunk of story as a complete thing.
Yeah, if you listen to listeners, if you listen to the Last of Us podcast, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann spoke about how the pilot episode, which was like almost 2 hours, was actually initially written to be 2 episodes, which is why the series only has 9 episodes. And they put it together because they realized they wanted to make sure they introduced Ellie, because Ellie was the inciting incident of the story. So the first episode was actually 2 episodes put together. And
And I think that was a really good choice, actually. And I think same with HBO allowing them to have a uniquely long episode on the 3rd episode, and saying like, yeah, actually, we want more of this. Do the extended cut. Do the full thing. Probably one of the best creative decisions. And I think this is a huge benefit, just creatively, of not needing to fit a network slot. And I think it's been a problem even just for a lot of streaming shows, even though they don't actually have that need to fit a network time slot. They still
Well, they feel
they'll
like
still
a lot of
write episodes like they're supposed to be a specific length, and so some episodes will feel too short and some will feel too long.
the problem that
And
I find with a lot of streaming shows, especially
yeah,
ones that are telling narrative, like one story over the course of a season, is they tend to write it like the season is the movie, and the season kind of
yes,
has the movie arc within it, and as a result, it kind of makes the pacing feel really weird. Like I think probably the biggest example of this for myself, obviously, I think is like Star Trek Picard and Discovery. I think both those shows
yeah, they
very much
both
have
struggle from
like
that. I think
the Netflix is
Discovery
Marvel
slightly
shows also have the
less,
same
but it is
problem too.
my biggest complaint with Discovery is that it can't allow itself to just be a
1 week to
creature
week
of the
thing.
week type of
Mm-hmm.
thing, which I think is often where Star Trek fits best. I think
Yeah, it's like this one does feel like it is like not a complete theme in itself.
but I
There's
think
there's ideas in here that are definitely like ongoing and
yeah.
necessary for sure. And I think that comes out most within, just bring us into the actual talking about the episode specifically,
Mm,
is the relationship between Joel and Ellie is really the focus of like deepening
yeah.
their relationship to each other, and how they specifically have a relationship to each other, and how it's different from say Joel and his daughter Sarah that they had.
Well, and the relationship that Joel had with Tess,
Mm-hmm.
and like again, there's a lot of paralleling of things. I think that this episode feels incomplete because I do think that next
Mm-hmm.
week's episode will kind of
Complement
close
it.
off this story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is that we don't quite get to the primary foil for this little arc
Henry and
until
Sam, who we meet at the
literally the
end.
last minute. And I don't think that's a bad thing actually with this episode. I
Mm-hmm.
just I hope that I think this episode will play better. Actually, it's a better way of wording this. I think this episode will play better if you were to watch when you watch this show after all of the episodes are released and you watch this episode, next week's episode as a single thing.
Mm-hmm.
It'll feel a lot more like a complete story. And I think every
And that kind of
previous
matches the
one
game too, because the game kind of has its own vignettes
sort of
as well.
episodic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a benefit to doing macro themes and micro themes. And I think so far the show has handled that really, really well. And I think part of our like disconnect between this episode and the previous set is purely because all of its payoff is next week and you can really tell.
Yep.
So there's a lot of interesting things happening here, primarily for the macro storytelling.
Yes.
And then some setup for a micro story that we're not even doing the second act of yet. Like, yeah, it feels like a first act.
Oh yeah, it's all very set up, and then we get our inciting incident right at the end, really there, with the Sam and could you agree? I mean, I'm sure I have to see the whole thing.
The little story, like I would say, there is kind of a one, like the story of them getting to the city and crashing and all that. Like that's interesting. I think the joke book story that they're kind of telling with this episode is a good completed little bit. I actually think it would have been better if they maybe left out the cliffhanger.
Yeah, and ended on that note.
Opened on that next week.
But you want to have the bring people in next week sort of thing. But yeah, I agree with you.
It kind of removed the resolution.
Yeah. Like, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's actually go back to the beginning and kind of go through this episode beat by beat.
Play by play.
I love the opening section where we get Ellie sort of playing with the gun that she's found by herself, kind of frivolously. Like it shows what we're gonna see later on, that she's still a kid and she doesn't really have a lot of respect for the weapon, and she's kind of like pointing it at the wall and kind of like playing with it, and also has this sort of like ongoing theme that we've had with her with fascination with violence, and something that we were speaking about, and we get little hints of it throughout the episode. And I don't want to spoil for people who have not played the games yet, but we'll clearly get some more of Allie's backstory and learn more about that as the series goes. But I'm curious if like that story plays into how she sees violence as the way for caring for people.
Yeah,
that's like her relationship to Joel.
I think that's definitely what they're kind of hinting towards, which I don't think. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I understand. I think Lady Night was saying this last week. Like she doesn't like as much the sort of thing of Ellie being more fascinated by violence, and I understand where she's coming from.
Lady Night the Brave, by the way, being our
mutual
friend and fellow YouTube creator, just so listeners know.
Yeah. So I think there's there's an interesting thing they're doing here where I think they're not actually saying that I think this episode really solves a lot of the issues with how they've handled Ellie's fascination with violence so far, to show that, like, no, she finds this really upsetting and she's not interested in this. It's that she is clearly someone who is a result of trauma, which I think is better connecting the current story to her backstory, which I think they can only really do because they already know the backstory, and
which they didn't have in
I
when they
don't
wrote
think
the
they
game.
really knew that when they wrote the game
No,
until
in fact,
they
I
wrote
listened
the
to the
DLC.
podcast. I listened to the
Oh,
podcast.
perfect.
Greg Mazin even talked about that as like how they can weave in elements from the DLC, which is Ellie's backstory for listeners. Again, we won't spoil it.
Yeah,
But they
it's
can weave
kind of
that
hard
in
to talk about it without spoiling it.
yeah, there's
But we had
there's
hint
context
toward
in that
it.
story. Yeah, there's context in
Yeah,
that story that will play into what's going on here in the way that the game, which was written first and then the DLC came after, can't really add in.
Yeah, so there's more. I think there's more of a interconnecting the fact that Ellie and Joel both clearly have serious PTSD, which I find the show's handling of so far very tasteful. As someone with PTSD, most things handle it in a way that is somewhere in between offensive and like just outright wrong.
Yeah,
like a lot of the time. Whereas I feel like, and I don't think Last of Us had a particular problem with representing that in the past, but like I just feel like the show is doing a really good job of carefully handling that. And there's a bit that I really found interesting, which we'll get to in a second when we talk about the crash and that whole scene.
One thing that I did scene that I did want to mention towards the beginning of the episode after this point was the siphoning bit where Joel's sort of teaching her about siphoning, and it showcases that like a couple things where number one, like he doesn't have the knowledge of why it works, and there's like sort of lost science and lost knowledge that comes back up a little bit later on the episode when we get to the doctor, about like he's the doctor and he has knowledge about certain things that kind of gets lost after a certain point in this post-apocalyptic world, which is just an interesting idea. But then also like how he doesn't really have much, Joel specifically doesn't have much of an interest in like teaching her survival skills. Is just sort of like, yeah, it's a thing I'm doing, whatever. That will come back as a completed arc at the end of the episode when he teaches her about the gun and sort of giving her those skills. So I just wanted to make note of that. But then there's a note that I know you want to talk about and I want to talk about that I think is really interesting, again in resonance with some stuff. And this will be a mild spoiler for the game, but it's not a huge one. But there's a sequence that is pulled right from the video game itself, like literally line for line, almost shot for shot, where they're driving in the car and Ellie has the gay porn mag of naked men that was clearly Bill's.
Bill and Frank, you mean?
Yeah, Bill and Frank. Yeah,
I know those are the actor names.
yeah. But there's the porn magazine that she's looking at, and she says like, "Oh, I want to see what all the fuss is about," which in the original game was just sort of a funny joke, but it makes is so much more context. And here's the spoiler that Ellie is a lesbian.
And she has no real interest in this and just kind of finds it funny. And I like how they handled that, and I like how they handled her just being like, "Bye guys," like the literal throwing away of sexuality as it relates to men is a funny way to foreshadow her coming out later. But
even though it was intentional in the game itself, even though those are almost verbatim the lines and sequence from the game, it fits. Yeah,
for sure. And I like that she's fucking with Joel a little bit, and they're at the beginning of the episode, Joel's a little bit less receptive, and it's just going to she's slowly breaking these barriers with Joel down, which, and likewise, Joel is breaking down a little bit of the barriers that she has up, just kind of accidentally. And it's these little things. And I think,
I also like that it shows that she's a kid too, because it's easy to play a kid as either too childlike or too adult. But I think the series is kind of nailing it, and Bella is there nailing this with the sense that like they're playful, or she's playful, excuse me, Ellie is playful, using she, her pronouns for Ellie. She's playful, and yet she's still got, like you said, like trauma and PTSD that she's still working through. So it's a good like sweet spot to like show that she's a kid, and I think Bella Ramsey plays it really well.
Which is a tough thing to pull off, I think, in a multitude of ways, but I think Bella which for context, Bella isn't a teenager. Bella's 19. Like, but they're doing such a good job of portraying Ellie's position, not just as a teenager, but as a traumatized teenager, and the way that both ages her and has prevented her from maturing in some other ways, emotionally speaking. That is a very, like, there's layers to how difficult performing this character I think really is, and Bella's doing a fucking incredible job with every scene. And
we then get to the scene where they sort of pull off the road, and it's the campfire scene, I believe, is the next scene we want to talk about. And again, this will get echoed at the end of the episode, but just for my thoughts on, I think I really what I really enjoyed, number one, there's sort of more playing around with like the jokes and things, but also her wanting to get reassurance from Joel that they're going to be safe at night. And again, it's sort of like something that we saw, I think in episode 1, where she tries to mask and hide that she's scared about the world a little bit, but wants the reassurance from someone that she sees can protect her. And
definitely
Joel sort of reacting to that with wanting to, like he does, stay up late overnight because he does want to protect her, even though he doesn't necessarily state that to her outright just yet.
Well, and the fact that Joel pretends to fall asleep, and then after she says that, like, he was gonna fall asleep, in the instant she says that, it draws on like all of his anxieties related to Sarah, which again, there's a lot of like little things like he's thinking about Sarah, like when she first is doing the jokes and things, and the way he looks away from her, so you can tell he's thinking about Sarah in that moment, and the type of joking around that they did. Even though it's not the exact same, it's these little echoes of things. And I love that Ellie, before they're going to bed, does the, why does the scarecrow get an award, outstanding in his field, and Joel is really like not allowing himself to engage, that he was kind of chuckling, but he's really hiding that in that first joke, and this is such a good setup for the end of the episode, which we'll talk about later. But
yeah, we then
that shot of him not sleeping,
I loved it. We then get them reaching Kansas City. There's a couple bits in between that.
Before that, they're discussing Tommy, which
yes.
This is really huge for a couple of reasons. One, episode 2, Joel and Ellie, and even episode 3, Joel and Ellie, right? Joel is very like, stop asking me personal questions. I'm not going to answer it, like that sort of thing. And after they have those interactions, and he stays up that night and stuff, he actually does answer questions. It's a long story. Well, we got 5 hours. So he explains how Tommy, which I think this is an interesting, I don't know if this was in the game. I can't remember because
in the game, they don't even mention that Tommy's alive until the reveal when you meet him later on.
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. So yeah, so Tommy,
to be a surprise,
but the soldier stuff, the fact that, so Tommy has a sort of hero complex thing, where he wants to be, at least this is how Joel is presenting Tommy. I don't know if it's actually accurate to the character, but it's Joel's perception of Tommy. And I think that's important to position it as that, because perception difference is kind of a thing that comes up a lot in Last of Us, writing about characters and things. And so he calls Tommy a joiner. And I think this is a subtle hint towards his distaste that Tommy was part of the Fireflies at one point. And I think we're probably going to get a little bit more of their backstory than we did, even just from some of the dialogue later in the episode. But that he places Tommy as having fought in Desert Storm and came back, feeling pretty disillusioned with the United States and all of that. And when the outbreak happened, it was Tommy that convinced Joel to be a part of a group and go to Boston and all of that. But the big note for that scene is Ellie asking, they have a bit of a back and forth, and Ellie says, so am I not family? And Joel says, no, you're cargo. And the one, the slight cruelty of it, but 2, Joel is desperate to not get emotionally attached. And what I find interesting is that here he admits that Tess was family.
Which I don't think he even admitted to Tess, really.
No, I don't think he processed a lot of it until that letter from Bill and Frank, which I find really interesting. Again, I do think that like that that really fucking hurts in a certain way too. Like, because Joel's hurting Ellie because he's hurting because they're fucking traumatized and they're not
trauma beginning
healthily.
Yeah, and this is trauma, and this is a theme that'll come up in the. We'll talk about the antagonists of this episode later on in the episode. We'll end with them, but I think that's an interesting thing that gets brought up in that idea of like trauma begets more trauma, begets more trauma, begets more trauma. These cycles of trauma,
cycles of violence,
that we'll see in that story echoed there. But moving on into
one last note. Also, Joel emphasizing that in a lot of ways, other people are actually a bigger danger than the infected in certain ways is a really interesting line about Joel's mentality.
Yes, and how he doesn't like connection with people too, as well.
Which after the last couple of episodes have been so much about why connection with other people matters. Which, like, I have major problems with a lot of apocalypse media doing the thing of like, deep down human beings are like the real virus and
the real Walking Dead
doing some eco-fascist. Like, it's just like, okay, your eco-fascist nonsense is not it. But I like this show, I think, is not doing that so far. More so than the game did.
It's interestingly challenging it here in this episode. Actually, why don't we talk about them here, because I think it makes most sense here. we will get to the Kansas City stuff with Joel and Ellie in a minute, but we do also meet the bad guy who we're framing as the bad guys, the antagonist. We meet Kathleen, who's an original character, not from the game, who is the head of this group that is like, some sort of militia group that lives in Kansas City, and
or just came into Kansas City and fucked up the Fedra camp.
Yeah, something like that.
It's not clear what's going on yet.
Sure, but I like her first scene because two things that are going on with this. One, in her first scene, she kind of is talking to that doctor, and we have, again, that loss of knowledge sort of idea when she does kill him later on. That sort of gets brought up. But also, too, she talks about how, like, they did this to my brother, and she kind of wants revenge for what was done to her brother, which, again, this idea of, like, trauma begetting trauma, and, like, people continually sort of passing it around in these cycles of violence.
And so we see before that show, we see the aftermath of some sort of conflict. Like, there's blood all over the walls from gunshots. Like, we know that
this is a place where violence happened.
And I think it's very... And I also find it very interesting that they choose to have her speak in a very specific manner, which we were joking while we were watching the episode that it's giving, I have concerns about the new neighbors. It's giving...
very Karen
I'm not
vibes.
Bigoted.
Yeah,
but it's
very, very neighborhood watch kind of vibes.
Not in a good way. And I think it's like, I think this show's a little bit more conscious of some of the race dynamics with their casting than the game was.
Especially since we'll meet more about Henry and Sam next episode too. It should be noted.
So I'm curious.
I'm sure we'll see how they handle that. Yeah,
I do find it interesting that she's trying to track down to black men with her Proud Boy escort.
Yeah, I was literally joking. As soon as I saw him, I'm like, okay, Mr. Wannabe Proud Boy, that she has as her dude. And it's clearly like they are. So again, we don't know their ideology yet, so maybe it'll get evolved. But it like clearly seems like there's like this wannabe militia. It's very
weird vibes. It's a lot of weird vibes. So
of course, the Karen teams up with the Proud Boy dude. But again, we don't know their ideology exactly. But what is interesting to me is like they have like on their truck like "We the People" and stuff like that. Which again, I think is like
and she has a line that was channeling some far right stuff.
Yeah, which is interesting just because in the context of what we're talking about with Joel, with him saying like, "Oh, other connection to other people is dangerous," and he just says when Ellie is just asking like, "Who are they?" And he just says they're people. And it's just like he just views any people, and it's not even about for him. It's just groups of people are dangerous, not their ideology, what they are. And so I think these are people. This group here is meant to, in Joel's eyes, affirm his view of people that he has about wanting to deny connection because he's used connection as dangerous. So this is like how these people are going to sort of like, I feel, reaffirm Joel's understanding of connection to people is dangerous, especially no spoilers for the game. But if you know how the story of Henry and Sam goes in the game, that's also another sort of cautionary tale for Joel in terms of where their story goes too, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that I think the show has done a good job of countering the common and again fundamentally incorrect argument that human nature is cruelty and
Yes,
hatred.
we saw that last episode.
I think the last couple of episodes have done a good job of saying it's not that,
but the systems
but
that these
people are capable of cruelty and violence and all that, and it's all systemic. It becomes from beliefs, it comes from systems, and I think this is the Mason effect.
It's clear. It's like it's notable to me that the two men that gets the closest connection are the two ones that live away from these systems that just get to be and exist in the world. They get to be removed from the violence, especially two gay men who
like I think that's a very specific choice, but
who
even
up until that point lived within a system that would have put them down for who they were.
Tess and Joel's actions and a lot of the shitty things they do is so clearly a result of the Fedra systems. And again, Fedra's very outright fascist. Like, it's not subtle about,
well, they literally say they're Nazis in episode 3.
Yeah, they call them Nazis. Like, I don't think that, again, like, we saw Fedra execute a bunch of citizens, and again, we can talk about the messiness of making Nazi comparisons without specifically engaging with the thing that makes Nazis as fascists a specific, like, again,
fascism.
It's not Nazis unless it's very specifically anti-Semitic, and
all Nazis are fascists. Not all fascists are Nazis.
Exactly, and I would say that Fedra, while like Nick Offerman's characters call them Nazis, it's better to compare them to just general fascists. Should I add that little cautionary note? But they are very specifically Nazis. I'm messing myself up now. Wow, good job me. But they are very specifically indicated to be fascists in text, both by characters and by things we see. And I think it's interesting that I think the show is sort of exploring different violent ideologies to some degree, which connects more with Last of Us 2.
Which we see in the sequence where Joel and Ellie are attacked by the group. And a few things going on with this. Like, Joel, we'll get to where I know what you're leading to in just a second with the comparison to Last of Us Part 2. But to get there, we have Joel and Ellie attacked. And again, I like this sort of assurance that during a violent moment, Joel is again kind of being that thing that he knows that Ellie needs, which is someone who has confidence saying, no one's going to hurt you, do this thing and you'll get fine. And it's sort of like the next evolution of that stage of relationship that Ellie sort of needs is desiring his confidence in that they're going to be safe, and him sort of providing that to her.
Which I think is so important to understand what Last of Us does with those characters. I'm not going to explain because we don't want to spoil too much, but I think it's also worth noting, like, the conviction on, they're not going to hit you. It has as much energy as a promise to her as being a prayer for himself. Because, again, how did Sarah die? She got shot while he was trying to protect her. Like, I don't think that they keep drawing on that well for very specific reasons, because Joel's traumatized. And I really appreciate also that Joel is trying to hide Ellie from violence as much as possible, because even though he hasn't dealt with, I think, a lot of his own feelings, he does really intimately understand that violence damages you. Damages you. We see at the end too, where Ellie sort of asks him, is like, does it get easier when you get older? And he doesn't respond to that, because he realizes in that moment, like, we tend to say kids shouldn't face trauma. It's like, no one should, and it hurts the same just as an adult. Yeah, that moment hits. Yes. Yeah. But it does lead us to a moment where, Joel gets pinned down by this one dude, and Ellie comes out and shoots him. And one thing that I want to note that I just really liked about the editing a little bit of this, and we can talk about the action itself. I was about to bring that up, actually.
About Ellie shooting this guy, was I loved when she shot him. There's a cut on her, and then there's a cut back, and we see the guy's already fallen, and like Joel's kind of fallen away, and we didn't really hear that. And there's like a lost amount of time in that edit, like by a few seconds, that I feel like is like when even implied a little bit of shock. A couple seconds, like it's like a minute or so. Yeah. To me, I found that a really interesting way to cinematically
express disassociation, which is something that I experience. So again, that's what I mean by like respectful handling of PTSD things. I think it's interesting that happens, but I also think it's worth it to note that Ellie aims for his head, then his heart, then his hip. Like she thinks about killing him twice, and then purposefully doesn't. And we get the gunshot, but instantly like disassociation upon that, which I think again we're going to probably see that trauma come up whenever we get Ellie's backstory. But I like that Joel, even after that happens, is trying to like find some way of hiding her from this violence again. So he he tells her to get back on the other side of the wall, and she goes over there and she cries on her own.
He doesn't
she's hiding those feelings
because he doesn't. He's hiding it from her, and he still doesn't view emotion as pain, as we talked about with episode 3.
But he kind of does, and he kind of doesn't. Like he won't acknowledge that it's that, but he knows it's bad. Like he's a stunted man who doesn't know how to fucking communicate his feelings. But the Ellie immediately hiding her feelings when Joel comes close again shows off how much of these two characters are both experiencing this closed off trauma response.
Yes.
That
she even says like I'm fine, and so both of them are hiding parts themselves from each other. I also really like that.
Trying to, they fail later.
They try. Joel also too later on sort of like takes the responsibility for the man dying. I mean, he did kill the man, obviously, but he like makes it very clear to her by stating to her later on when he's like, well, you did not kill him. And it's like a part of his speech later on is like, oh yeah, this is still gonna hurt. Like he's like trying to have that emotional moment of bonding with her, but he makes it very clear. It's like, you did not kill him.
And he also says the line of like, I'm not good at this, I'm sorry. And like I find other handling Joel's difficulties with being a good supporter interesting. And I think before we get to that moment, I do find a really interesting choice that they include Last of Us 2 style callouts of dead people's names. Like they really emphasize.
So just to let listeners know what we're talking about, in the video game The Last of Us Part 2, which is a sequel to this game, this isn't spoilers for this game, it's just a system within that game. When you attack or kill people within that game, like just some of the NPCs rolling around trying to find you, other NPCs will call out their specific name. Every NPC has a specific name, and the way that game is game is trying to do is it make you feel every person that you kill is a full person, and try to make you understand how violence is sort of these cycles that are inflicted upon other people in your violence and seeking revenge to a degree.
They're trying to again.
It's whether or not you agree it works.
I'm not going to give my big rant about
why. That's the
Naughty Dog doesn't
idea.
Understand ludological narrative.
Anyways, but that's the concept within Last of Us Part 2. That's the concept
they're trying to do. I think it works a lot better in a TV show. Because the point in Last of Us 2 is to make a commentary about Ellie, but it ends up just being a commentary to the player for engaging in violence, which the player doesn't actually have a choice about, but they're acting like, oh, making the choice to do this violence is bad. But this is the
this is about the game. In the TV narrative show here, we have
the TV show is just about the characters. Yes. And
we have this guy that Ellie shot. The guy that Ellie shot. So it's like tries to humanize himself to Ellie by saying like, this is my. I forget what he said his name was, but like
Brian. His name's Brian.
Screw him. He's not a person. He's an NPC. No. No, his name's Brian. He tries to humanize himself to Ellie, and also Joel, so that he can live, in this situation.
Well, and the fact that Joel kills him with his own knife
that he gave to him to try to bargain for his life. Yeah.
It's a good knife. Did make me giggle, but then I was like, oh, that got dark quick. I genuinely thought that Joel was going to like torture him, and we were just going to sit on the other side of the wall with Ellie while she listened. But no, he just put the guy out of his misery, which, it's fucking dark. It's a dark scene, and I think they handle it well. But I think the other thing is that Joel has this extreme torment over Ellie knowing violence, and then Ellie says, like once they've gone and hidden and there's trucks trying to find them and whatever, and they're having a chat in this building that they found. But Ellie says in response to Joel being very tormented about that and trying to comfort her and trying to explain that it's not her fault. And Ellie just says, it wasn't my first time.
And that she can't protect her at all.
Yeah. And so Joel has this realization of, oh, it's too late for that. and the best thing I can do now is to help you be tough, which is so fucked. It's so fucked. Like the entire thing is fucked, but it's a result of circumstances and things.
But then they bond over. That's when they start to bond over this violent tool. When he shows her how to use,
they both
the
cry
gun.
a little bit before that, though. They both wipe away tears in front of each other, which this is a big fucking moment emotionally for both characters. But yeah, they connect over a gun.
Yeah, which I also again adore how Bella plays this. He like showcases joy in his face that he's displaying, and I think that that's just a really like not what I would have instantly thought if I was the actor in that scene. It's not exactly the moment I would have picked of like joy, but she plays it so well, and I thought that was just a really great like kind of excitement
because she sees it as Joel finally respecting her,
and also again still her like continuing fascination with like violence and wishing to be able to protect and have agency in herself.
But the connection of the idea of violence as agency and violence as an act of love. But here's an interesting thing too within that layer. Because they sneak into a big building, they climb up all the stairs. Like there isn't a ton of more plot in this episode, other than we know that the Karen and Proud Boy are trying to find
Henry and Sam, the brothers, who we'll learn later on, and then also which we'll analyze more next episode. And then there's also that like
weird scene. I don't know what is that supposed to be a bloater underground? Are we going to see?
I'm sure it's meant to be like evoke some monster that they're gonna have to like want some sort of infected monster they have to deal with.
But... Yeah, I wonder if they're going to go with one of the boss designs from Last of Us 2, because I know there's a boss
there's the specific one in 2 that I know exactly what you're thinking of. I'm like I'm surprised if they pulled that forward, because that seems like something you save for later.
Yeah, like that. I feel like that specifically being in that hospital where the first cases happened type thing was like a very specific choice. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with it. It was a very weird scene. I don't really get it. Again, this is that thing of this episode feels like a lot of setup and very little payoff beyond a little bit of. There's some really interesting stuff with Joel and Ellie's relationship development, but I think it's the macro story, and I don't think it's really like it's not really resolving anything. But the big thing to me is when they get all the way up in the building, just what was I gonna say?
They get in the building.
Oh yeah. While they're going up there, Ellie asks him if he killed innocent people, and Joel can't answer her.
Yeah, because he knows the answer is yes.
And it's interesting to me because Joel can't bring himself to lie to Ellie at this point. Like that's such a contrast to Joel from earlier episodes. Again, they're really developing a bond, and I love that. You know, when she says the joke at, the bit that I really want to talk about was paying attention to things is how we show love.
Yes.
But here's the thing, the way that they pay attention to each other is still in the context of violence. So Ellie's noticed that Joel favors a specific ear. And that ear is favored because Joel's fired guns too often. He has a line about, you best stick to that knife unless you want to end up like me, which tells us so much about why, like Joel, I think they're doing a lot better job of establishing like Joel has done a lot of violence for a very long time. And I feel like it's going to be interesting to see what his relationship with Tommy is when they get there.
Yeah, we'll see that when we get there. One thing that I also do want to note too is this like Joel now being more willing to teach Ellie, where like Ellie asks him about the glass, and like they kind of have a thing about that, which is sort of a distinction from the siphoning bit at the beginning of the episode too, which I thought was a nice little parallel at the end. And again, we get an echo of like Ellie telling jokes, and now they're sort of bonding at the end. And it's like
Joel can't pretend like he's not laughing anymore.
Yes, again, it's a really, really great scene, and I think that wraps out everything that I want to say. Is there anything that you wanted to say about the episode before we wrap out?
No, I don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Cool. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to our review of episode 4 of The Last of Us. Before I forget, everybody, let me know if you like these types of reviews. Obviously, I can't have people every time for like discussion reviews, but if you like us to continue to do these like discussion reviews of The Last of Us / maybe for other things, let me know, because I would love to have Aronach back. And even if you don't like Aronach, I don't care. I'm gonna do it anyways. It's my channel. I'll do what I want. But I'm sure you also adore Aeronok. I just want to see comments that say Aeronok's lovely. So I'll end there. Let us know if you like this in the comments. What are your thoughts about the episode? And beyond all of that, I send you all love, my friends. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.